At the moment, Honkai Star's 4 main combat engines of the game are follow-up attack, traditional carry, break effect, and damage over time, each based on a certain playstyle and/or mechanic through which they deal their damage. Unless I'm forgetting something, for the remainder of HSR's metagame in the foreseeable future, with the combat systems we have now, as in they don't make entirely new gameplay elements, any new character coming out henceforth will belong to one of those 4 categories. Version 1 sought to establish these engines, while version 2 was aimed at expanding upon them, to the point where similarly to version 2 being the turning point for Genshin's team building meta, Honkai Star is now finally operating on the basis of optimal teams, best in slots, best synergies, so on and so forth. Right now, the follow-up attack and break engines have had no shortage of new support coming in and are presently the stronger 2 of the 4. Meanwhile, traditional carry and damage over time have been taking a back seat throughout the latter half of version 2. Suffice to say, carries are in a more jeopardized position, but having just made a video on Jiaoqiu, I feel like it would have been redundant to make 2 videos back to back on the same topic. Rest assured though, I will be addressing them later down the line. For the time being, let's go over damage over time instead. While to its credit, the engine still remains a viable selection, Kafka and Black Swan have been gradually losing presence in the metagame since their heyday back in 2.0. For the first time ever, the duo has been knocked out of the apex tiers, with Pure Fiction being their last remaining holdout. Although even in there, it wouldn't be unreasonable to call their tier 0 status into question. For today, we'll be discussing the current situation with damage over time, the problems they suffer from, and how they can be addressed. One thing I really appreciate about the way Starl goes about characters, it's that you can never tell where someone truly stands in the metagame. Changing circumstances or the addition of a new cast member can result in drastic improvements for a once underperforming unit. Gallagher was a middling sustained character until Harmony MC skyrocketed him to one of, if not arguably the best abundance character in the game for a time. Topaz has been slowly but surely creeping up in value as more and more follow-up attackers came out. Version 2.5 marks the first time we see the Debt Collector in top tier, and it's no surprise why she has too many carries to mingle with. Where I'm getting at is that I'm fully expecting this video to age poorly, or rather, I'm counting on it. I'm glad the destruction video I made last year aged poorly. The whole point of these videos is to bring to attention the current state of the meta in the hopes that future action will be taken to balance things out. That being said, Rappa is the only scheduled character for 2.6, and let's just say I know a guy who knows 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 about 2.7 and 2.8. The next couple patches don't look that optimistic for the DoT engine. Now, in spite of the engine itself having trouble keeping up with the rapid evolution of other forms of combat, damage over time is an almost ubiquitous mechanic in Starl. When affected by DoT, at the beginning of a target's turn they take damage, as is the case for DoTs in other games. There are multiple ways the DoT can be applied to a target, universally being through weakness breaks of either physical, fire, lightning, and wind, applying the respective dots, bleed, burn, shock, and wind shear. While frozen and entanglement do apply damage at the start of a target's turn, for calculation's sake, they're not considered damage over time. Aside from weakness break, characters can also apply dots on their own. For example, Himegos attacks have a chance to apply a burn equal to a portion of her attack. Furthermore, some units may have their own custom dot effect, though typically it still registers as one of the 4 basic types. Black Swan's Arcana is a unique form of damage over time, but it's still regarded as a wind shear. Jiaoqiu's Ashen Rose counts as a burn. Multiple dots can be present on a single target at the same time, including multiples of the same kind, provided they come from a different source. Meaning you can have 10 shocks or 10 wind shears if they all come from different sources, applying sequentially based on when they were inflicted, with the exception of Arcana always applying last. The active stacking damage over time comprises a focal point of the greater DoT engine. Spearheading the team are the 2 lovely ladies Kafka and Black Swan, and it's the former's trademark playstyle from which the engine originated. Kafka's skill and ultimate have the ability to essentially copy a turn's worth of damage of all dots applied to a target instantly, meaning her damage is determined by the number of dots applied to a target. If in a given scenario, a target takes 200 damage per turn from a bleed, 200 damage per turn from a wind shear, 200 from a shock, and 200 from a burn, Kafka's ultimate will deal an additional 200 damage of each type, totaling 800. Meanwhile, her skill will do 75% of that. In essence, the goal of DoT teams is to layer as many DoT effects as possible to increase Kafka's power. Compounding the strength of this team is Black Swan's own interaction with dots. Just like how Kafka grows stronger the more dots are applied onto a target, so too does Black Swan. Unlike most conventional dots that you apply once and then let it do its thing, Arcana's a stacking dot, wherein subsequent stacks beyond the first deal more damage and grant more properties at certain thresholds. Swan herself can apply stacks of Arcana with her skill, and her A2 and A4 traces can apply more stacks too, but the hallmark way to do so is through her talent itself. Every instance of a target receiving damage over time has a chance for them to receive a stack of Arcana, so if you have 5 dots on a target, assuming sufficient effective rate, they receive 5 more stacks of Arcana, and since Black Swan's Arcana damage is coded to be the final dot effect activated, those additional stacks will detonate shortly after being tallied. Swan's Arcana can deal AoE damage at 3 stacks or higher, making her the first and currently only DoT character with this ability. Moreover, at 7 stacks, Arcana deals partial true damage. Applying damage over time with Black Swan makes Kafka stronger in that she can then duplicate that damage. Likewise, because Kafka's immediate detonation technically counts as an application of damage over time, she can add even more Arcana stacks to the target, allowing for increased mutual gain beyond surface level synergy. The main strength of damage over time is twofold. First and foremost, their consistency. Damage over time depends on comparatively less moving parts than that of other mechanics, resulting in steady, reliable damage output every turn. You don't have to mull over critical hits because dots can't critically strike. Although unfortunately, this means you do have to mull over speed. Secondly, their accessibility. In light of crit stats not being a priority, achieving a workable baseline for these characters comes down mostly to attack, speed, and effect hit rate, making them fairly easy to get going right away. In addition, it's easy to build a team around them too. While Kafka and Black Swan are a package deal by this point, the engine itself is designed to be interchangeable. If say a physical character comes out who can also manually trigger dots the way Kafka can, it's as simple as swapping her out and putting the physical character in. Support-wise, basically anyone who can increase attack, speed up allies, or debuff enemy stats can work with them. Both Ranmei and Robin make for a good buffer as they can juice up the two carries equally. Huohuo's battery and attack boosting capability make her the best choice for a sustain. No doubt you've seen that one comic on Huohuo getting pampered very suggestively by her big sisters. At the moment, Kafka, Black Swan, Ranmei or Robin, and Huohuo make up the premier team for damage over time, and from a first impression standpoint, there really is no weakness with this group. They can handle AoE scenarios, take down bosses quickly, they have good elemental coverage considering you have 2 carries instead of 1, and unless they fight someone with a ton of effect res, the win condition of this team is to just throw as many dots on the target as possible. Even for the effect res issue, you can alleviate that with more effect hit rate, and right now there aren't that many enemies who can cleanse themselves. All things considered, the Kafka Swan team has been a great choice for MOC and PF, and if you're in a pinch, they're not too bad in APOC Shadow either. So, what exactly has been making them lose market share? The most relevant cause would be their lack of updates. Black Swan was the latest dot-focused unit to come out, and that was back in version 2.0. We're almost at 2.6. A lot has happened between then and now. In 2.1, we saw a monumental leap in power for the carry engine in the form of Akron, tearing apart all preconceptions we had of what real damage is. Shortly after, the follow-up engine received its first flagship team, Ratio, Robin, Topaz, and Aventurine, presenting another contender in the meta. Then, not too long after that, we were given the Break engine, creating an entire new playstyle. In the span of 3 months, we've gotten 3 new top-level teams to join Kafka Swan at the Apex tiers. As often stated before, to be popular you have to either be the best option or the only option, neither of which the DoT engine laid claim to anymore. The follow-up and Break engines have continuously built on their respective foundations. Later in 2.3 we had Jade, a stable presence in pure fiction when paired alongside either Himeko or Herta, 2 other follow-up attackers. Then in 2.4 we had Yunli, another follow-up attacker, although her case is a bit unique, but still technically considered a follow-up. Then Marjade, a minor boost to follow-up attack and break. Then we had Jiaoqiu, who I'll talk about in a moment. 2.5 brought with us Fei Shao, Mosa, and Lingsha. Obviously Fei Shao and Mosa are more additions to follow-up, while Lingsha is the new sustain for break teams with even the possibility to moonlight as a follow-up healer too with their summon, though I think she's mostly for breaks. Now, Jiaoqiu's an interesting case. While he primarily revolves around damage over time having a personal dot effect in the form of Ashen Roast, it's debatable as to whether he was intended for the DoT engine or for Akron specifically. While he is a competitive option for DoT teams, what makes Jiaoqiu not an immediate must-have is that Ashen Roast does not have any built-in synergy with either Kafka or Black Swan. There's no clause that says if party members deal damage to enemies, they get hit by a stack of Ashen Roast. All of Jiaoqiu's mechanics are self-contained. The reason he works so well with Akron, however, is because 1. His ultimate causes all enemies to receive bonus ultimate damage pertaining to Akron's area of expertise quite nicely, and 2. The frequency at which he can apply his dot debuff. Identically to Black Swan, Jiaoqiu also wants to stack Ashen Roast on enemies, however, in his case, additional stacks don't increase the dot damage of Ashen Roast. We really don't care about the damage at all. Instead, further stacks increase the damage enemies take. So for all intents and purposes, Jiaoqiu's dot is more of a debuff than an actual dot for DPS. The frequency at which he applies Ashen Roast is more conducive to Akron's ultimate activation condition than it is to Kafka and Swan's dot stacking. Curiously, there is a fairly decent party entailing Akron, Black Swan, Jiaoqiu, and Aventurine, but that team is constructed to drive Akron, not Black Swan. For that matter, one of the reasons why Jiaoqiu has a hard time getting into Kafka Swan teams even though he can, is because you have to choose between him, Ranmei, or Robin. Jiaoqiu can bring another dot source for Kafka and Swan to abuse along with the increased damage amp, but Ranmei also has bonus damage, but in addition she has all-type res penetration and bonus speed for the entire party, so the opportunity cost you have to pay to have Jiaoqiu in place of Ranmei isn't exactly the best. I suppose you can make an argument that Jiaoqiu frees up Ranmei or Robin for other teams, but that alone doesn't address all of the engine's issues. This actually segues nicely to my next point about what damage over time is truly lacking: a sustain unit. While Huohuo is certainly good, she's technically not a dot-focused healer. The follow-up engine has Aventurine to handle sustained duties, while the break engine has Gallagher and Linkshot, but we don't have a healer who can apply a dot of their own. Not sure if I'm allowed to say this, but considering he's been out for a while now, Jiaoqiu used to have an actual heal in his kit, but then they took it away from him, likely because that would have made him too OP. Don't know why, given by lore he's a healer, but in any case, that's the main thing DoT teams are missing right now. They're still only making use of universal supports, which is the next problem. Prior to Harmony MC, Ranmei was only really optimal for Kafka Swan. To be fair, she can buff any team, that's kind of her shtick, but specialty-wise, the only team she was best in slot in was Kafka Swan. Akron didn't really care to include her, nor did the follow-up attack team. However, when break teams came out, everyone moved Ranmei out of Kafka Swan and into Firefly and Boonhill teams, as she can get more mileage over there. Like I said with Huohuo, her ultimate's excellent for Kafka and Black Swan, but she herself is a general healer, not really a dot sustain. The dot engine also lacks a dedicated Harmony unit. Robin and Ranmei fulfill that niche, but they both have their own flagship teams to be a part of. Damage over time is a side hustle for them, so to speak. Beyond the absence of updated supports, the dot engine itself has a few limitations to it. While not being able to crit makes damage over time consistent, it also means you can't vertical invest into it that much. Black Swan makes up for that by having an absurdly high Arcana cap, but that comes with a few limitations of its own. More importantly, damage over time is inherently backloaded. It activates at the start of the enemy's turn. Yes, you can trigger manual detonation with Kafka, but functionally the mechanic itself has a hard cap on when it can activate. It's not like follow-up attacks where you can push the limits of turn count or break teams doing ridiculous DPS even on your support characters. Damage over time is a fixed mechanic, compromising flexibility. For one, enemies are starting to get faster, just like Ihule. While enemies being faster may appear to lend itself to more DPS, since taking more turns means more damage over time activations, counterproductively it prevents you from piling on Black Swan's Arcana stacks. Basically at E1 or less, Black Swan would love nothing more than for the enemy to take forever to take their turn so she can get 50 stacks of Arcana on them. E2, E4, and E6 make Arcana more fluid and less time sensitive, but for them to actually take real damage, they have to ideally take their turn quickly. As a result, damage over time is less effective in Apocalyptic Shadow, where literally every action counts towards your clear score. Kafka's immediate activation allows them to perform well in pure fiction, not to mention Black Swan basically one-shotting enemies with her Arcana's blast radius and their A4, but the team is still more or less gated by enemy turns. We can alleviate the stress of having to apply as many Arcana stacks as possible in a short time if we had a buffer and sustain unit who can apply dots too. So with all certainty, if the engine got more support, that would address the problem of needing to keep pace with enemy tempo. But there's still another weakness of damage over time. No pun intended. In spite of weakness breaks applying a dot source in and of itself, damage over time doesn't lower toughness, and as you know, while enemies have a toughness gauge, they take 10% less damage, which does matter. Not only that, but weakness break is a defense mechanism too, in that it stops enemies from attacking. You can always make a support with a passive that makes it so if enemies take damage over time they lose toughness, but again that ties back to the whole issue of them not having gotten any new support as of late. And finally, content. Damage over time is the only engine without an Omni break. The carry engine has Akron, the break engine has Firefly, Shuiyi, March, the follow-up engine has Fei Shao, and March 8th again, but the dot engine has no one so far. Kafka and Black Swan are more reliant on enemy weakness types, ironically making them less consistent. Overall, if it wasn't glaringly apparent, Kafka and Black Swan could really use some new support to tie up loose ends. The engine can easily be a force of nature like its cohorts, it just needs to get actual support, preferably support that applies only to them and doesn't run the risk of getting stolen like how break teams took Ranmei. Unfortunately, as mentioned earlier in the video, I don't think we'll be getting anything for a while. We might have to wait until version 3 honestly. What do you guys think about damage over time? Do you agree or disagree? If it's the latter, I'd love to hear your reasoning in the comments down below. For now though, if you enjoyed the video, a like and subscribe would be much appreciated. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other archetype discussions if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.